Hi, I'm Rich Baker from Rollin' and Riches, and this is Improv Breakdown.
Here's how, for me, people always say, oh, improv's like life, and I'm like, okay, great. Because I'm cynical.
I am. It's like, me?
Getting the laugh.
Yeah.
You asked for it.
What?
Yay!
Well, welcome to the Improv Breakdown. I am so excited today. All my guests are amazing, but this guest in particular, he has been practicing improv for over 30 years, a member of several historic Chicago long-form teams like Carrane the Passions, the author of multiple books, including Improvising Better, a guide for the working improviser that he co-authored with the incredible Liz Allen. His class, The Art of Slow Comedy, has been a staple among well-known independent improv workshops. And of course, the creator and host of the seminal podcast, Improv Nerd, with over 260 episodes and counting, and the catchiest earworm of any theme song, Jimmy Carrane. Thank you so much for being on the Improv Breakdown.
Well, Rich, thanks for having me.
Oh god, this is an honor because you started it all, right? You're the guy. Like you were kind of the first to do like, hey, let's talk about improv on podcasts, and now everyone does it. But you were the guy. I just can't.
I did it because I thought I had heard Mark Maron's WTF, and I loved that. And I thought, well, I'll do one about improv because I love improv, and I love interviewing people because I had experience at doing interviewing people on WBEZ for about Chicago Public Radio. Mm-hmm. I combined those two things, and I really thought that I was going to become famous.
Well, I mean, in certain ways you are. Like, you're improv famous.
Yes, but as you know, improv famous doesn't go that far.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. You thought you were going to be like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson famous.
Yes, at least Mark Maron famous. But I'll tell you the one thing that I am grateful for is I went into it not knowing. I went into it very ignorant. Like, I didn't know. I thought it was me and Mark Maron. Those were the only two podcasts out there. and I think that's not a bad thing. But after a while, you're like, where's mine? And then you get a little bitter.
Sure, yeah. Well, take me back to the very beginning. At one point, you weren't an improviser, and then how did improv cross your path in the first place?
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, a very wealthy suburb called Kenilworth, and went to a really great school called New Trier, and it was one of the best schools in the high schools in the country. Mm-hmm. But I cheated my way through. I copied people, I had people write my papers. I copied off people's tests. And by the time I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do. And it was a very depressing time. I suffer from depression. And so I went into a very deep depression. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was lying to people saying I was going to Northwestern just to make myself feel better. And I really think that I got into an improv class. It was called the Players Workshop at the Second City. Do you remember that in Chicago at all?
I don't think it was around when I saw it, but I saw a documentary not too long ago, and I knew a lot of people who talked about the great Players Workshop. I missed out on it.
So the Players Workshop was like when you went to Second City to go see a show, there'd be this flyer as you were going up those dangerous stairs, and it would be like want to learn improv, and it was called the Players Workshop at the Second City, though they were very clear that they were not associated with Second City, or you couldn't put Second City on your resume, it was just really crazy. So I did that, and that felt, and when I did that, Rich, and I've interviewed a lot of people in improv. Everybody goes, oh, I found my tribe, I found my people, but I really did. And everything that I had been punished for by being a smart ass at school or being a wise ass at home, I was now being rewarded in improv. And that's where, and I definitely had found my people.
Wow. Right. And you just kind of stumbled onto that flyer? Like, were you just going to see Second City just as a fan?
Well, I had seen Second City. My dad had actually, his law firm was represented Second City. And my dad kind of knew Joyce Sloan, even though it was another attorney who handled the business. So I knew of Second City. They'd go to the openings. They'd always say it was like Saturday Night Live. And then I think junior or senior year in high school, I went and I saw a show at Second City, and I'm like, this is pretty cool. It wasn't like this is pretty cool, I'm going to do it, but it was in the back of my head that eventually maybe if I didn't go to college, this would be something I could fall back on.
Oh, that's great. And then so you start with the Players Workshop, and you're just like, I'm here. This is what I'm gonna do.
And I really sucked when I started. I think I sucked for a long time. Probably I was one of those people who thought I was better at it than I thought,
Yeah.
and I was probably a jerk too to a lot of people. So I went to Players Workshop, and then I went to the Second City Training Center, which was I don't think it was even called the Second City Training Center, and but it was 5 levels. And then I had a couple people in the class, Madeline Long, Tim Meadows, and Alan Lieb, and they were all taking classes with this guy called Del Close doing the Herald. And they were really good. They were, because they had the experience, they had the stage experience, and I'm like, I want to do what they do. So then I went over to the Improv Olympic and I studied with Del.
Wow. Well, and so you brought up earlier, like feeling depression, like in high school and different things like that. And I think we even talked about this when I was on your podcast, but depression and improv, really creative arts in general, but I feel like in improv tend to go hand in hand. Have you noticed that, with other improvisers?
Yes. Yeah. Depression is definitely there. And then the thing I think that complicates it, and I certainly, I've been sober for a long time. I think then you bring alcohol into into the equation, and it creates a mess. And I also think the other thing that's consistent with improvisers is we either come from really dysfunctional families, which I think most of us do in improv. Then there's the 20% who have the really supportive parents, you can do anything in your life kind of people. But I think for the most part, we all come from dysfunctional families.
And, it's a cliche that I hear thrown around. I'm sure I've said it myself, of like, improv is my therapy. But I mean, to some degree, improv really is therapeutic. Did that help you with the depression, or did it exacerbate it, or how did that work?
Yeah, well, for me, it gave me a self-worth that I'm still working on. But at the time, it was like, because I came in, I think depression I've heard is, anger turned inward. So you're pushing your anger down. And for me, I grew up in a household that emotionally we were very repressed. There was really like anger was the only emotion you were kind of okay to express. But everything else, joy, fear, sadness, that was all pushed down, pushed down, pushed down. So I think the fact that I came from that household and that I could stand on stage in front of an audience or in front of, at that time, my classmates and express myself was hugely therapeutic and really helpful for my self-esteem.
Oh, that's great. So at what point in your journey, you said, you sucked at first, which almost all of us do, at first, but at what point in your journey did you realize that you wanted to become a teacher?
I think it was really out of necessity for me in terms of, I realized there was only 2 people that got paid for an improv, the piano player and the teachers. And I thought, well, I could do this, I could teach. And my first time I started was 27 and I was at the Annoyance Theater, and I started there and I probably taught for a year and a half or 2 years. And then I took a long break. And then Frances Collier, who was at Second City at the time, said, will you come over? We had done we'd gone to Washington to teach improv for a corporate show. And she's like, you should really teach. Why don't you come to Second City? And that's where I got my, really, I think, I really started to get good at teaching. But I believe that I'm a better teacher than I am an improviser. I enjoy teaching a lot more than I do performing, and for me, I'm constantly evolving to get better at teaching.
And that's the mark of any great teacher, right? Is like, if anyone goes, I know everything and I'll just teach you. Like, if they're not taking in new stuff, like I feel like it's a recipe for being a terrible teacher eventually.
Yeah. And that's what I try to do. And therapy has helped me because I'm in group therapy. things will come up with students that, and I think you probably know this when we're teaching, especially online, it's like it's only us. So I go to my therapist. I've had issues that I go to other teachers and I say, what can I do here? I don't know what to do. And I've gotten some great advice. And that is made the difference, because that's humility for me is, am I teachable? Do I not know everything?
Yeah. Well, and talking about therapy, your art of slow comedy class, like I've had a number of friends take that class, and they tell me that it's, everyone says improv's kind of like my therapy, in certain ways, but they say that your class particularly was very much like digging deep underneath. Like when you started the art of slow comedy, did you have that mindset of like, we're going to go real, like, differently than other types of improv classes?
No, I did it really as a reaction because I came up, Del Close was he was a big slow comedy, slow it down. We're not doing sitcoms here. And it was a reaction really to what I had been seeing. And what I had been seeing was a lot of people faster, funnier, and there's some people who do it and they still have principles of slow comedy. They're connected to their partners. They're emotionally reacting like actors. I'm talking about people who go out and say, oh, it's just frenetic energy. Oh, let's say something funny, And so it was really a reaction to that. And that was the slow comedy I always felt when I did it at Dell's class or IO or Jazz Freddy or, Carl and the Passions. Those were the slow comedy. That was the thing that I found most rewarding. And so that's what I wanted to teach.
Wow. And, I know that your students, or at least the friends of mine, said, we're not allowed to really talk about the details of the class because it's a very safe place, and like things get revealed and whatnot. But, in a regular improv class, or in most improv classes that I've taught or been exposed to, you don't really get too personal revealing. But I've heard that sometimes in your class, things get really deep. Is that accurate?
Well, first of all, like, I never say, oh, you can't say anything, like you can't, and I think I've adjusted. Again, I've adjusted over the years. There's an exercise called it's called the vulnerable circle, where I'll ask you like what's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? What do you think of your mom? What do you think of your dad? And then I'll say, tell us one thing that will surprise you about you, and then you would reveal it. And at times that can be very, very, very emotional.
Yeah.
For people, now more than ever, I say, look, and again, I think this is just a sign of like things are changing, and you have to adapt to what's going on. I'm saying, look, at any time in any exercise, if you don't want to participate, you don't have to. If you want to pass, you don't want to answer a question, you can pass, because I want people to feel, I want people to feel safe.
Sure, absolutely. That's really cool. And did you find that by revealing those things that it helps people kind of dig into more emotions, or how does that help their improv?
I think what it does is, and it's so interesting because people will be like, oh, that, when you do it, they'll be like, oh, that was really hard and that's really difficult, but I'm really glad we did that because it built support and trust. I think what it does is, one is it has people become very vulnerable. The other thing is, what you'll find out if you say like, well, I don't like my mom. Okay. Then you'll have other people say, well, I don't like my mom too. And so now this thing that maybe you were holding on to, other people have in common, and you're not alone with it. And I think really that's the reason people are doing improv, or the reason I was doing improv, is because I couldn't do it alone. I've always wanted to be a stand-up, and I was just too afraid. And improv, you're not doing it alone. You're always doing it with supportive people.
Wow. Did you ever did you ever get up at open mics or anything?
I took a stand-up class maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and then I just did a one-person show called World's Greatest Dad. And so I love doing that,
Yeah. Well, that's great. So the books. You've written multiple books. How many books are you up to now?
I think it's 3. Yeah.
Wow. That's great. What was the impetus for that first book?
Well, here's how, for me, like, people always say, oh, improv's like life, and I'm like, okay, great. Because I'm cynical, but so Liz Allen and I did this thing called the individual assessment tune-up. Was that, it was, it, and the individual assessment work, it was a workshop. And so I have a marketing background. And so I'm like, we wrote a it was a flyer, actually. This is how long ago it was for the audience out there. I'm old, everybody. I'm 56, and improv, that's like, what is that, Rich, about
3,000-ish or something?
3,000, yeah. I'm so old, we actually had actual real objects when we started. Like, we actually had chairs. And so we wrote out this, Liz and I wrote out 10 things. We called it 10 blind spots of that we had seen in our workshop, because we had done this for a couple of years. People cherry picking, yes. I can't remember the other ones. And then people were like, you should write a book. 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 And when you hear it enough, you're like, well, maybe I should. And at that time, Mick Napier had written a book, and Sharna had written Truth and Comedy. Mm-hmm. And things were so much simpler back then. So I remember calling Mick and maybe I talked to Jen Eslin, and she gave me some advice. And they're like, "Oh, why don't you talk to our publisher, which is Heinemann?" And then Sharna got us in touch with her publisher, and we decided to go with Mick's publisher, and that's how it happened. I mean, it was like the universe was conspiring with us to write this.
Wow. Did you, before that happened, did you ever think that, oh, one day I'll be an author? Was that even on your radar?
No. Never thought I was a good writer at all. I just, I think sometimes improv, and for me at least, you're like, I'm an improviser. That's it. I'm an like early on, it was like, what? I'm an improviser. I'm not letting go of that, and like, I'm not going to sell out and do a commercial. I'm not going to sell out and do real acting. I'm an improviser. And you came a little after I did, right, in Chicago?
2005, yeah.
It was, so I was in about 86 or something like that. It was like an artist colony, especially with Dell. Dell was like, for better or worse, you were an artist and you sacrificed for your art form, and you were skeptical of people. We all wanted Second City, but we all had kind of resentment towards Second City, and we were superior. We were like the Harvard of improv, and we're talking about 30 people,
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Wow. Well, but that's interesting, and I mean, I kind of understand it too. Like, this idea of like, I'm an improviser, I'm not this or I'm not that, I'm this. But at the same time, like, Second City was the goal for most of us, right? And Second City was doing mostly on their stages, scripted acting, right?
Yeah.
Was there any kind of squaring that circle of like I'm an actor, but I'm an improviser, but I'll still do this if they let me?
I'll tell you something, Rich. This is so ridiculous when I think about it. So all I wanted was Second City. All I wanted was Second City. I didn't think about it as acting. And you know what? Here's the crazy thing. I didn't even think about it as sketch comedy. I don't know what I was thinking. I honestly don't. And then I was about 30 years old, and Saturday Night Live came. And this is one of my biggest regrets. Saturday Night Live, and I've told this story before. So Saturday Night Live came, and they were looking for people, and they asked me to audition, like to fly out.
Oh, wow.
I had a plane ticket, the whole thing.
Wow.
And I was really messed up. I mean, I had no support system. This is pre-therapy, any getting into recovery. I was a mess. And I remember I had a weekend to do, I think they asked you to do 3 characters and then 3 celebrity impersonations. And I had nothing. And that week, so Friday, so it was like cramming for a test. Friday to Monday morning when I was supposed to get on the plane, I was just alone in my apartment, obsessing about what could I do? I don't do this. I had like Charles Kuralt. They're not going to get Charles Kuralt. No one's listening going to get Charles Kuralt. And that Monday morning, I go into my agent and I say, I'm not going. Now, I was supposed to get on a plane, right?
Yeah.
I have the plane ticket in my hand and the hotel reservation. They're paying for all of it. And I'm like, I'm not going. And she's like, why? And I was like, I don't do sketch comedy. And it's so funny because the rumor mill in Chicago, which back then, again, it was like 30 people. So rumors, went pretty fast.
Sure.
People, I remember somebody, a couple months later, were like, I was doing a gig with them and they're like, oh man, you're such an artist. You turned down Saturday Night Live. That was great. And I'm like, that was like the stupidest thing that I ever did, and I don't think, and I always get in fights with my therapist. He's like, you would have gotten it. That's why you didn't go. I wouldn't have gotten it. But I think, Rich, to do it and have that experience, you never know what that's going to lead to. And I regret that.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, it's because there's like a fear of failure and also a fear of success at the same time, right?
Well, mine has always been fear of success is much more than the fear of failure. I have failure down. I've done failure pretty well for the last 56 years. It's success because you lose control. For me, success is like you lose control, complete control.
Yeah. But that's,
go on.
No, well, I was in improv, like, and I would say at our best, we lose control on stage, right?
Right. But I think the funny thing is, I think if we really did if we did research or whatever, I bet you we would find out that a lot of people in improv suffer like me with control issues, and getting on stage and letting go is a great way of trying to work through it.
Because it's a very safe space to let go because it's just a state. Oh wow, you're blowing my mind, sir.
Well, I think the other thing too that I suffer from, and I think a lot of artists do, and especially improvisers, is this perfectionism, right? We want to be perfect. And improv, you're fucked, man. You know that you're going to fail as much as you're going to succeed on any given night.
Yeah. Whew. Deep wisdom. Love it. Okay, Improv Nerd. I believe there's 269 episodes out. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's insane. Mm-hmm. I've just dropped my 15th episode, so I'm in the very beginning stages of where you are. But like over 269 episodes, like what have you learned from doing something for that long, creating something that's lived for that long, that's affected so many people, that people listen to? What's that been like?
I think I've learned, well, the one thing I'm really proud of is I think that it's helped people. Like I've run into people who go, oh man, I moved to Chicago because I listened to Improv Nerd. Oh. And that you do have an impact on people, even though you get weird about how many downloads you have, or is this episode good? You do have an impact on people, and people are listening. And then all the other podcasts that come out. I used to be like, oh, when I first again. I'd be like, oh no, they're ripping me off. They're doing an improv podcast. And it's like, no, there's plenty for all of us. This is really you don't need to be jealous. You don't need to be threatened. This is a good thing. The more people are talking about improv, the more they're going to find your podcast,
Yeah, the whole rising tide, all ships thing.
Right. But I was always the guy, let's, pull everybody down, to make myself feel better.
I've been there myself. I still struggle with that. I still will get that little feeling and be like, okay, no, you've moved past that. Get on, right?
Are you jealous too? Do you get jealous? Okay.
I used to a lot. Used to it was like rage jealousy. Now It's more of I see it coming and then I'm like, okay, let's see if we can just move past it.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting emotion that I have, because everyone I started out with in Chicago, from Dave Koechner to Tina Fey to Amy Poehler to Jeff Garland to John Favreau, Adam McCabe, on and on and on and on. When they started to get successful, I was jealous, and I think I could only be happy if their shows got canceled or their movies bombed and what when I hear people being interviewed, or I've interviewed them, I'm not jealous. I'm not jealous. I think people think it's about the other person. If I say I'm jealous of Tina Fey, it has nothing to do with Tina Fey. It has to do with me and my inadequacies. And that's when people that I started out with started to be become successful, one of the reasons besides being jealous was I took it personally. And
Yeah.
what the question I would say to myself is, what am I doing wrong? And so it was I used it against myself, and it was an indictment of myself that somehow I must be doing something wrong. But the truth of the matter is, like, take any of those people I'm jealous of or were jealous of. And there's times, I'm certainly over it, but there's times where it comes up and it flares up and you're like, okay, I'm aware of it. Okay, what's going on in my life? They worked for it. They worked really, really hard. And, they were driven. They didn't have fear, or if they did, they knew how to deal with it. They knew how to network. I mean, there's so many things. And all those people they were super talented,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm sure you've had this happen to you many times, more than I have, but not a couple of years ago was the first time that a former student of mine had gotten onto the main stage of Second City. And I was like, mostly like over the part of my life where I was jealous, but at the same time, like that just went, because that was, for the longest time, that's all I wanted was that main stage. And go, oh, this guy who I taught in level 1, he's cool. I'm sure that's happened to you probably a lot.
Well, I think, yes, it has. And I think the ones that are hardest is like, I have a friend, she wrote a book, it's really successful. And I'm like, I'm jealous. And I'm like, well, do I want to write a memoir? Yeah, I probably want to write a memoir. Do I want to write it now? I think the ones where I'm jealous and like, I have to look at myself and go, well, do I really want that? Because jealousy for me is almost like, it's like a magnet. I'm just attracted to it. It's like, oh God, the recycling truck comes. Like, I really want to be on a recycling truck. I'm really jealous of it. It's like, do I really want to be that guy? I mean, think about Second City. Like, I get it, but like, you're actually beyond it now.
Yeah. It's just like you said. It's just those vestigial, like the things that you wanted when you were younger. The things just like what, and they attack you in those weird ways.
But good for you that you didn't deny it.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh man, this is so good. Okay, let's get into some improv lessons. All right.
Great. I love it.
You've been in this game forever. Like,
right.
Are there lessons that you learned when you like in the first year or two that were like you've just carried with you that have stood the test of time that you're like, man, I got some wisdom there and it was gold?
Well, I think, slowing stuff down to me, and I didn't even, was a really big one for me, because I came in improv where it was like, to me, it was all, I would say probably the first 10 years was all about getting the laugh.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the line, I gave up that and went towards the craft of it. And it was about building the scene. Now, probably in the long run, I wasn't as funny, but it was much more fulfilling and much more rewarding. And it was much riskier in a lot of ways. So I think the slowing things down was a huge thing. And I remember interviewing somebody, that guy who wrote Improv Nation. I can't think of his name. Mm-hmm. But I said, what kind of improv do you like? And he goes, well, I like it when it's very slow and thoughtful. And he said, the reason I like that is I realize that when people do that they can start, there's an emotional element to it. They're tapping into their emotions. Now, I had been teaching this thing that I call slow comedy for years, and I never saw that. So by slowing stuff down, and that's true in life. Like, I'm a fast eater, I got to eat. But if I slow things down and take my time, I can taste the food more. I can enjoy the company. But I always want to get things over with, so I don't have to feel the joy or the sadness or the fear or whatever that feeling is. But by slowing it down, there's an emotional connection that the two people make that you can't do with words.
I love it. Can you think of anything that you were taught, early on that once you started performing, you realized, oh, that doesn't jive with my experience. Like, my teacher said it, but from performing, I'm like, no, I don't need that anymore.
Well, I think I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with Yes and Yes and has evolved over time. When I first started out, I I would consider myself a realist. Like I wanted real life. And if that meant asking questions, fuck you to the rules, right?
Yeah.
Don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. So I asked questions. And I don't think necessarily, I'm not a hard and fast guy on questions and rules as it is. So I think the question thing, I kind of was like, I'd rather be more authentic than ask questions. But the agreement is an interesting thing because it's evolved over the years. I think I resisted early on with agreement. Then somewhere in the middle, I agreed. And then I would say probably in the last 5 years, it's like, okay, it's agreeing to the reality. So two players, if we agree we're brothers and we're and we work in a bakery, that's the reality of it. If we have different points of view and you say something, let's say, you're a Trump supporter and I'm a Biden supporter, that's your point of view. That's my point of view. We don't have to agree on that. Yeah. So I think, so my relationship with agreement has changed over the years. I know early on people are like, yes, and you got to say yes, and you got to say yes, and. But I've seen in my work, and I've also seen in my students' work, people just say it as a reflex.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I've seen yes and evolve just in, since the early 2000s as well. Like, it's really, we keep the same words, but the meaning kind of gets a little deeper, a little more nuanced as it goes.
Right, and I think, too, that I've seen it in my classes is yes and it has degrees. Like, if you're doing a group scene, man, there's no negotiation with yes and. I mean, the first thing that's said, I mean, you gotta form alliances, you gotta support that idea, or it's going to be a clusterfuck.
Yeah.
When you got a 2-person scene and you're doing organically and you're making discoveries, which is how I like to work and how I like to teach, you have a little more room than if you're doing a group scene.
Yeah. Now, I know you mostly, exclusively actually, as a long form improviser. Did you ever dabble in short form? How do you feel about short form?
I did. Well, it's interesting. I did short form with a group called the Comedy Underground, and it was one of the best groups that I've ever played with. Who was on there? Andy Richter was on there.
Oh, wow.
Mitch Rouse, Jay Leggett, Dave Keckner, Brian Stack, Noah Gregoropoulos.
Wow.
It was all guys. I think Rachel Dratch might have sat in with us, but I'm not even sure about that. But we had done long form, and I don't know why we went to short form, but we did short form. And I then became, after that, I was like done with short form, and I became a short form snob. And it wasn't until I started to do Improv Nerd that I started to interview a fair amount of people from comedy sports. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, Rich, comedy sports, and I don't know when you were here if it had a bad name, but in the 80s, it was like, oh, comedy sports.
Yeah.
That's not really improv. But I really learned to appreciate short form and what they do in comedy sports because of the podcast, and my attitude changed. Is it improv that I like to do? No, but I have a lot more respect for it.
That's cool. Yeah, there's always been that that weird, the as you said, the short form snobs, and I think sometimes long form improvisers get a lot of flack for sometimes being short form stuff, but then you've got short form improvisers that think that the long form is like, oh, they're uppity and up their own thing, right? And it's like, why do we need any division here? It's like, we're all making stuff up on a stage. Let's get over it, right?
Well, and really, there's a lot of elements of short form that long form could benefit from,
Yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the argument of like, all this different methods of improv, and it's like, okay, we're all trying to get to the same thing, which is to be in the moment. That's it. If we really boiled it down, it's just to be in the moment, so we can make things up.
Woo! Good stuff. So that's one kind of trend that you've seen, the division between short form and long form, and that's kind of not near what it used to be. But any other trends that you've seen since the late 80s till now that you've looked at?
Okay, so music improv didn't exist at all. No, in the 80s. And then, probably around somewhere, I'm going to guess, in the late 90s, Baby Wants Candy started it the at the IO, and that was the first time I had seen musical improv. Now I know there was other places that had done it, but I know in Chicago, Baby Wants Candy was the first one to do it, and they do it really really well. And
Yeah.
from there, then I saw Second City in Chicago have a musical program. IO had a musical program, and people were doing like improvised Sondheim and improvised musical to musical. I mean,
Yeah.
there was all sorts of things. So that was something. And again, when that started, I was like, it's kind of gimmicky. But again, just to show how much you learn by doing these podcasts, I had people do. Jeff Baudier, who was the music, I think he's head of the musical department at Second City, and Stephanie McCullum. The emotional level you can reach in doing music is amazing.
Yeah.
And it was something that I never realized. And it's hard. And probably some of my judgment was like, I can't do it, or I can't do it well, so I'm going to put it down.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever tried it since then, since you've changed your mind about it?
I've tried it on Improv Nerd, but I've never gone out and done it. And another episode, and here's the other trend that I saw was more genre improv. We didn't have that, and again, if you did genre improv back when I started, it was you were selling out. But like Improvised Shakespeare is a great show. I know they were at IO, and I know they've done shows in LA and New York and stuff like that. We didn't have any of that, and they do it so well, but there was no such thing as genre improv.
Yeah, wow, that's huge. Have you taught in Europe at all? Have you done any of the overseas?
I haven't. I'm really afraid to go to Europe. I'm afraid to fly. I traveled around before my daughter was born. I traveled around the country doing festivals and stuff like that. And it was a lot of fun, but I'm not somebody who likes to travel. There's people like Rosowski and Dave Rosowski and Jay Suko who love to go. To do that, you really have to love to travel, as well as teaching. And I like the teaching part, but the traveling, ruins it for me.
Fair enough. So if people want Jimmy Carrane, they got to come to you.
Yeah, or I mean, I will do it in the States if now it's hard to do, but
Sure.
I'm open for that. But going across, the ocean scares the hell out of me.
That's totally fair. You have any predictions on where improv is going? What new things are on the horizon?
Well, I mean, I think we're in, because of the pandemic, we're certainly in this uncertain time. I do think one thing is this Zoom teaching is first of all, it's, I was really skeptical. So in March when this all hit, I was like, Zoom improv. Okay, I'll try it, right? And I remember the first night I did it. I mean, again, I got a lot of help. I remember calling teachers. Kevin Riom, who's, I don't know if you know him, he's a teacher at Second City. He talked me off the ledge, and he actually gave me the lesson plan for the first class, which isn't my normal thing. I don't usually go in with a lesson plan, but he gave me a lesson plan, and I went in, and I was, not only was I scared of the technical side of it, but just, oh God, how can you do improv on this? And so I did it, and at the end of class, people were like, oh, we just want to let you know, this was surprisingly good. We didn't think it was going to be this good. I wasn't sure. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't either, And then what I also realized too was that at least at the beginning of the pandemic, we really needed this connection. And what I'm doing now is like, I'm providing a connection for people, that we're doing beyond doing the stuff in class. And I'm lucky, and I'm sure your experience is too, people from all over the world are now studying with us because of this.
Yeah, they don't have to fly to Chicago. They can just get online.
So I think, to answer your question, this is here to stay. And I don't think it's going to be, it's going to be I don't think all of it, it's certainly going to go back to live teaching and stuff, but I think there's going to be a fair amount of segment of this that's still going to exist.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I was directly in your boat. You know, when it first started, I was like, we can't do this online. It's not, the magic's not going to be there. And I remember in the Second City, we're having meetings about like how to do this, and we're like, well, do we set all scenes? Are all scenes on a Zoom call? And it's like ridiculous to think about that now, but that's where we were. We didn't know. It was brand new.
But you guys had, and I know I talked to you. I think I did your episode around there. That time, you had I think it was after you had just taught, you started teaching. That had to be really helpful to have other people trying to figure this out together.
100%. Yeah, those first meetings where there was a ton of teachers on a Zoom going, how the hell do we use this thing? Like, I remember in the first Zoom meeting, we didn't even know we could change our names in Zoom, or do it like all these little tricks and different things like that. And we were just all like babies, with this like, what is this new tool?
But I mean, in terms of live theater, I mean, performing live, I first of all, in Chicago, and I think everywhere, the communities are going to be smaller. I mean, I can only really guess about Chicago is Chicago had a lot of people moving in to take classes at, Annoyance, Second City, Comedy Sports, IO. When we get back up and we're going to be live, we're not going to have that. Those communities, it's almost going to be like a rebuilding. And I think for me, it's going to be good in terms of artistically for the community, because in the 80s when I started, there was only IO, I told you about Players Workshop, and then Second City. And out of that, Annoyance came, and I was lucky to be a part of that. And some great stuff came because there wasn't, I think, there wasn't many opportunities for stage time as they are today. And I think in a lot of ways, improv got too big in terms of there was theaters like parroting, doing the same thing. Oh, we're going to do Harold. We're going to do Harold. We're going to do Harold. So you have 8 theaters doing Harold. It's like, well, what? You're just kind of like, it's just like a carbon copy. You're just making carbon copies. And I think by having less, I'm hoping by having less of that parody, that when people do stuff, that we will all get more noticed. And I think people will be very desperate to go even to see bad improv. And hopefully there won't be as much bad improv because of it. We're hoping.
From your lips to God's ears. Sir.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carrane, you are. This is just such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Where do you want to send people? Where plug?
Well, send to my website, jimmycarrane.com, for my Artist Low Comedy classes, which I have some starting in February, and my workshops, and of course the Improv Nerd and my blog. So yes, go to jimmycarrane.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. The original improv nerd, Jimmy Carrane. Thank you for being on the Improv Breakdown.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about improv, please put them in the comments below. To get notified about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Roland and Rich's YouTube channel and click the little bell icon below. Thanks, improvisers, and keep making each other look good.